Forget the cutlass, forget the flintlock pistol. Hollywood gave you a pirate with one sword and one gun, standing on a ship's deck looking cool. Real pirates were something else entirely. They were desperate, ingenious, and absolutely terrifying. And they carried weapons that most historians barely mention. Weapons designed to maim, to spread panic, to win fights in spaces so tight you could barely swing your arm. Today we're counting down 10 pirate weapons history almost forgot. No myths, no movie magic, just the brutal, fascinating truth. Number 10. The boarding axe. Most people think of axes as medieval weapons. Pirates thought of them as the ultimate multi-tool. The boarding axe was standard equipment on pirate and naval vessels throughout the golden age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730. It wasn't just a weapon. It served as a grappling tool for climbing hulls, a breaching tool for smashing through cabin doors, and a cutting tool for clearing tangled rigging during battle. The head featured a sharp blade on one side and a hardened pick or hammer on the other. When pirates swarmed a merchant vessel, these axes led the way. A man with a boarding axe could hack through a locked hatch in seconds, hook the rail of an enemy ship to pull it close, or bury the pick end into someone's skull at close range. British naval records from the early 1700s list boarding axes among standard ship's armaments alongside cutlasses and pistols. They were cheap, nearly indestructible, and required no gunpowder. When your pistol misfired, which happened constantly in the sea air, your axe never failed you. Surviving examples show handles of roughly 18 to 24 inches, designed for one-handed use so the other hand stayed free to grip a rope or rail. Number 9. The marlin spike. This one sounds like it belongs in a carpenter's toolbox. That's exactly why it was so dangerous. A marlin spike is a pointed iron or steel tool, typically 6 to 12 inches long, used by sailors for splicing rope, untying knots, and working with rigging. Every sailor on every ship carried one. Nobody looked twice at a man holding a marlin spike. That made it the perfect concealed weapon on a ship where open weapons might get you killed by your own captain before a mutiny could be organized. Pirates used marlin spikes to settle scores below deck, to start fights that looked like accidents, and to threaten informants in tight quarters where swinging a cutlass wasn't possible. Period accounts from the Caribbean trials of pirates in the early 1700s, records kept by the British Admiralty, frequently mention marlin spikes appearing as weapons in shipboard confrontations. They were the pirate world's version of a shiv, always present, never suspicious, lethal in experienced hands. Number 8. The swivel gun. Here is a weapon that bridges the gap between a pistol and a cannon, and it belonged to the pirates. The swivel gun was a small artillery piece, typically firing a half-pound to 2-pound iron ball mounted on a pivot post at a ship's rail. It could rotate a full 360 degrees and be aimed quickly by a single gunner. Effective range was roughly 100 to 300 yards, but pirates rarely used them at range. The real purpose? Loading them with grape shot, clusters of small iron balls, or even scrap metal, nails, and broken chain, and firing directly into a packed enemy crew at close range. One swivel gun loaded with grape shot, discharged into a group of sailors on a deck, was catastrophic. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, when she was fully fitted out around 1717 to 1718, carried an estimated 40 guns, including numerous swivel guns, mounted at her rails. When that ship came alongside a merchant vessel, the psychological impact alone was often enough to force surrender without a fight. Swivel guns have largely been forgotten because they don't fit cleanly into the cannon or pistol narrative. But in pirate warfare, which was about intimidation and speed, they were invaluable. Number 7. The grenade. Yes, pirates had grenades. This might be the entry that surprises you the most. Naval grenades, sometimes called hand grenades or grenados in period documents, were in active use by the early 1600s and were standard weapons aboard fighting ships by the golden age of piracy. They were hollow iron or ceramic spheres packed with black powder with a slow-burning fuse inserted through a small hole. Pirates used them in two specific and terrifying ways. First, they threw them into enemy ships' gun ports before boarding, detonating inside a cannon deck in a confined space. Second, and more creatively, they threw them into a ship's hold where enemy sailors might be hiding after a boarding action. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates in history, who captured over 400 vessels in just 3 years, was documented using grenades during engagements in the early 1720s. The 1724 account, A General History of the Pirates, by Captain Charles Johnson, the primary historical source for the Golden Age, mentions the use of grenades in several engagements. They weren't precision weapons, they were panic weapons, and in the chaos of a boarding action, panic won battles. Number 6. The blunderbuss. You may have heard the name. You almost certainly don't know what it really was. The blunderbuss was a short-barreled, large-bore firearm with a distinctive flared or bell-shaped muzzle. That flared muzzle was not decoration. It served as a funnel for loading in a hurry. You could pour powder and shot into it quickly, even on a pitching deck in rough weather. The wide bore accepted buckshot, nails, broken glass, gravel, or any other improvised projectile. At close range, under 20 feet, it was devastatingly effective. Beyond that range, the spread pattern made it nearly useless against a specific target, which made it perfectly suited to one purpose: repelling boarders crowding onto your deck all at once. Pirates and the merchant sailors trying to defend against them both used the blunderbuss for exactly this reason. You didn't need to aim. You pointed it at the mass of men climbing over your rail, and you fired. British East India Company records from the early 1700s document blunderbusses being issued to merchant vessels sailing through pirate-heavy waters. When those vessels were taken by pirates, those same weapons became pirate weapons. Surviving examples from the period are held in collections at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. Number 5. The smoke pot. This is where pirate warfare gets genuinely sophisticated. A smoke pot was exactly what it sounds like: a sealed clay or iron pot filled with a mixture of combustible material, sulfur, pitch, saltpeter, rags, and sometimes animal dung, designed not to explode but to produce dense, choking clouds of black or yellow smoke when ignited. Pirates used them strategically. Thrown onto an enemy deck just before boarding, a smoke pot created a wall of blinding, acrid smoke that disoriented defenders, obscured the boarding party's approach, and in some cases drove sailors below deck to escape the fumes, leaving the top deck empty and undefended. The same principle was documented in use by the Byzantine Empire over 1,000 years earlier, but period naval warfare manuals from the 17th and 18th centuries describe smoke devices specifically in the context of boarding tactics. They appear in Dutch and English naval records under names like stink pots. Some versions added additional materials specifically to make the smell unbearable. It was low-tech psychological warfare, and it worked. Number 4. Chain shot. By now you know pirates used cannons. You don't know what they loaded into them. Chain shot was one of the most specialized anti-ship projectiles ever designed. Instead of a solid iron ball, it consisted of 2 half balls or 2 full balls connected by a length of iron chain. When fired from a cannon, the chain shot tumbled through the air in a wide, spinning arc. The purpose was not to punch a hole in the hull. The purpose was to destroy rigging. A ship without its masts, sails, and rigging cannot maneuver, cannot run, and cannot escape. A single well-placed chain shot could shear through a mast or slice a web of ropes that took weeks to rig properly. Pirates used chain shot to cripple prey without sinking it because a sunken ship with a hold full of cargo was worthless to them. Bar shot worked on the same principle. 2 iron balls connected by a solid bar instead of a chain. Both types required skilled gunners to use effectively. The accounts of experienced pirate crews, Bartholomew Roberts, Edward Blackbeard Teach, Calico Jack Rackham, all suggest they carried experienced former naval gunners who understood exactly how to use these specialized rounds. Number 3. The boarding pike. When the gun smoke cleared and the ships were locked together, when there was no room to reload and no room to swing a cutlass properly, the boarding pike kept men alive. A boarding pike was a pole weapon, typically 8 to 14 feet long, with an iron spearhead. It was used in 2 phases of a sea battle. First, to repel boarders, defenders lined the rail with pikes, forming a barrier that made it nearly impossible to climb over without being speared. Second, once boarders were on deck, pikes could be shortened or discarded in favor of cutlasses. But the initial defensive line bought critical seconds. Blackbeard's final battle in November 1718 at Ocracoke Inlet provides one of the best documented examples of boarding combat from the entire Golden Age. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy led the engagement. Contemporary accounts describe intense close-quarters fighting, where boarding weapons, pikes, axes, and cutlasses played decisive roles when firearms ran out of ammunition. Blackbeard himself reportedly sustained 5 gunshot wounds and over 20 sword and pike wounds before finally dying. That's a testament to the chaos of this kind of fighting and the importance of every weapon in a man's hands. Number 2. The Calthrop. This is a weapon so old it dates back to ancient Rome. Pirates rediscovered it and used it brilliantly. A calthrop, sometimes spelled caltrop, is a small iron device with 4 spikes arranged so that no matter how it falls, one spike always points upward. Ancient armies scattered them on battlefields to injure cavalry horses. Pirates scattered them on ship decks. When a pirate crew was about to be boarded, they would scatter calthrops across their own deck. Barefoot sailors, and many sailors went barefoot for better grip on wet decks. Stepping onto a calthrop in the heat of combat would be instantly incapacitated. A man hopping on one foot, howling in pain, was not a man fighting effectively. Combined with the smoke pots mentioned earlier, calthrops turned a deck into a trap. It was low cost, required no skill to deploy, and was brutally effective against an enemy crew that couldn't see what they were stepping into. Archaeological evidence and period inventories from recovered or documented pirate vessels suggest calthrop-type devices were carried as standard defensive equipment. They were cheap to make, easy to store, and devastatingly effective. Number 1. The fire ship. This is not a handheld weapon. This is an entire vessel turned into a weapon, and it was the most feared thing on the Golden Age sea. A fire ship was a vessel, usually an older, smaller ship no longer useful for combat, packed with combustible material, tar, pitch, gunpowder, dry wood, oil-soaked rope, and sulfur. A skeleton crew would sail it directly toward an anchored enemy fleet or a single target vessel, lock its helm in place, light the fuses, and escape in a small boat. The fire ship would drift into the enemy and ignite, spreading fire to everything it touched. In the age of wooden sailing ships coated in tar and carrying black powder magazines, fire was the most catastrophic thing that could happen. A ship could not outrun a fire ship in a calm harbor. In 1718, the same year Blackbeard met his end, the pirate and privateer Henry Jennings had been documented using or threatening fire ship tactics in Caribbean waters. The Spanish and British navies both used fire ships as legitimate weapons of war throughout this entire period, and pirates who were largely former naval sailors knew exactly how effective they were. The fire ship is not a forgotten weapon, it's a forgotten terror. And in the golden age of piracy, terror was the most powerful weapon of all. The pirates Hollywood gave you were romantic. The real ones were practical. Every weapon on this list existed because it solved a real problem. How do you take a ship, hold a crew at bay, or survive in the most dangerous profession in the 18th century world? The answer was, whatever worked. And sometimes what worked was a pot full of burning sulfur, a handful of iron spikes on a deck, or an entire ship on fire aimed at your enemy. That's the real golden age of piracy. If this sent you down a rabbit hole, hit subscribe. We go this deep every single time. And drop in the comments. Which weapon shocked you the most? I'll read every one. See you next time.